about the first wife of legendary country music star Johnny Cash is available for anyone to stream.
Before she died in 2005, Johnny Cash's first wife finally broke the silence about their marriage, and what Vivian Cash revealed shook everyone who thought they knew the real story.
She was a very private person and was not prepared for...
It's bad. For decades, she had remained quiet while the world celebrated her ex-husband's legendary romance with June Carter. The woman who stayed quiet for so many years, raising 4 daughters alone in California, had something important to say about the man in black.
There was nothing in her past that would have prepared her for that. And it's nothing she ever wanted.
Her revelations would challenge everything fans believed about America's most famous country music love triangle. And it wasn't what anyone expected to hear. The woman behind the legend. For years, people only knew her as the wife who got left behind. While Johnny Cash and June Carter became country music royalty, Vivian Cash lived in the shadows, raising 4 daughters alone in California. She watched from afar as the world celebrated Johnny and June's love story. But Vivian knew a part of the story that no one else did. The real story starts long before June Carter ever comes along. It began at a roller skating rink in San Antonio, Texas, on July 18, 1951. Vivian Liberto was just a teenager when she met a young Air Force man named Johnny Cash. He wasn't famous yet. He was just a normal guy who couldn't skate very well. But instead of worrying about falling, he sang along to the music playing in the rink. That night was special. Just before the rink closed, Johnny asked Vivian to skate with him. He was shaky on his skates and kept losing his balance, but his singing made her smile. When a Rosemary Clooney song started playing, Johnny sang the words softly, and something about his voice made Vivian's heart feel warm in a way she had never felt before. Their love grew quickly. Just 3 weeks after they met, Johnny had to leave for Germany with the Air Force. But before he left, he carved "Johnny Loves Vivian" into a bench along San Antonio's famous River Walk. They promised to write letters to each other, and they kept that promise. What followed was a long-distance love story told through thousands of letters, which later filled the pages of Vivian's book. Johnny wrote to her almost every day for 3 years, sending his thoughts and feelings. His letters were full of love, loneliness, and the funny charm that would one day make him famous. But even in those early letters, there were signs of trouble, things Vivian only understood later. Johnny wrote about drinking too much and spending time with other women. He always promised to stop, and each time Vivian forgave him because she believed in their love. Vivian had no way of knowing that the young airman she fell for would become one of the biggest stars in the world, and she never imagined that the sweet love story in those handwritten letters would one day break her heart in ways she could not have expected. Coming home and getting famous. On July 4th, 1954, Johnny Cash came home from Germany, and Vivian's world changed forever. She and her family drove to the West Memphis airport to meet him, and when she saw him walking toward her, words weren't necessary. "I just fell into his arms. He scooped me up, and we kissed," she wrote. A month later, on August 7th, they were married at St. Anne's Catholic Church in San Antonio. Vivian was marrying the love of her life, the man who had written her love letters for 3 years. She had no idea she was also marrying someone who would become one of the most famous people in America. At first, Johnny was just a regular guy trying to make a living. They moved to Memphis, where he took a job selling appliances door to door. He hated knocking on strangers' doors and convincing them to buy washing machines and refrigerators. But Johnny had bigger dreams, and those dreams were about to come true in ways that would change everything. Johnny's brother Roy introduced him to friends Marshall Grant and Luther Perkins, and together they discovered their shared love for what they called hillbilly music. They would get together and play, just for fun at first. But Johnny had something special in his voice that couldn't be ignored. Then came what Vivian called 1 hour that would change everything. Johnny auditioned for Sam Phillips at Sun Records, the same place that made Elvis Presley famous. When Johnny came home that day, he was practically bouncing off the walls. "Baby, we're cutting a record," he told Vivian, who was pregnant with their first child, Roseanne. The song they recorded was "Cry, Cry, Cry," which Johnny had written in just 15 minutes. Just like that, Johnny Cash and the Tennessee Two became Sun Records' newest artists, joining a roster that included Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Roy Orbison. Vivian wrote that Johnny and she especially liked Elvis. He was an all-around great guy and became a very close friend. In those early days, before the fame got too big, there was still room for friendships and normal relationships, but success brought its own problems. The tours started, and with them came the attention of female fans. When Vivian asked Johnny if he was ever tempted by all those women throwing themselves at him, he gave her an answer that would become one of his most famous songs. "I walk the line for you," he told her. That phrase sparked something in Johnny's creative mind. He asked Vivian to write down lyrics while they were driving in the car, and "I Walk the Line" was born. Released in the spring of 1956, around the time their second daughter Kathy was born, it became a #1 hit and made Johnny Cash a household name. With fame came opportunities, and Johnny's new manager, Stu Carnall, convinced him that California was where they needed to be. At this point, Vivian wrote, "I simply agreed with whatever Johnny wanted to do. I can't say I had much of a mind of my own." California dreams turn into nightmares. In the summer of 1958, about a month after welcoming their third daughter, Cindy, into the world, the Cash family moved west to Encino, California. They bought a house that had belonged to Johnny Carson, and it seemed like they were living the American dream. But underneath all that success, Vivian noticed what she called a dangerous current running beneath their exciting life. The move to California didn't bring the fresh start she had hoped for. Instead, it marked the beginning of Johnny's slide into behaviors that would eventually destroy their marriage and almost destroy the artist himself. Johnny's drinking, which had been mentioned in those early letters from Germany, began to escalate. Worse than that, he started taking pills. These weren't just any pills. They were the kind that could make someone stay awake for days or knock them out completely, depending on what they needed. All of the things that Johnny had called filthy and dirty in his actual words from the love letters, and had insisted would destroy our lives, were things he began to embrace, Vivian wrote later. The man who had once warned about the dangers of drugs and alcohol was now falling into those same traps. Cindy Cash, who was just a child then, remembered hearing her parents fight only once, but she also remembered something more telling. Mom always seeming worried and staying up late, but she never let us see her pain.
He just didn't yell. He didn't allow it, and if we started arguing, we had to go outside.
Vivian was becoming an expert at hiding how bad things were getting. The pills weren't just changing Johnny's behavior. They were changing who he was as a person. Looking back, Cindy said, pills kind of led Dad into a very destructive period in his life, and Mom unfortunately paid the price. But Vivian still believed things could get better. When Johnny suggested they move again, this time to Casitas Springs in Ventura County, she thought maybe a change of scenery would help. In late summer, 1961, 2 weeks after their fourth daughter, Tara, was born, they packed up and moved to a hillside home above Nye Road. Vivian hoped this move would put a stop to Johnny's bad behavior. She was wrong. The house in Casitas Springs was beautiful, perched on a hillside with views that should have been peaceful. But instead of becoming a sanctuary, it became the setting for some of Johnny Cash's most infamous bad boy behavior. The pills, the booze, the binges, the arrests. It all happened while Vivian was trying to raise 4 young daughters and keep their family together. It wasn't long after we moved to Casitas Springs, Vivian wrote, that everything, and I mean everything, started to fall apart. While Johnny toured and his fame grew bigger, Vivian stayed home, watching their marriage crumble from the inside. Longtime friend Alice Smith remembered Vivian saying, "If I only could have traveled with him instead of being here raising 4 kids, things would have been different." She said that a lot. The Man in Black's dark side. Living in Casitas Springs from 1961 to 1967 gave Vivian a front-row seat to Johnny Cash's transformation from troubled husband to full-blown bad boy of country music. These were the years that created the legend of the Man in Black, but they were also the years that destroyed Vivian's marriage. Johnny became a regular at Lake Casitas, supposedly going there to fish. Vivian wrote that he actually wrote the first draft of Ring of Fire, one of his most famous songs, during a fishing trip there. But fishing wasn't all he was doing. He was also partying, drinking, and sometimes passing out in his boat. Randy King, who managed the Lake Casitas Marina, remembered Johnny well. "He used to come out here, drink too much, and go over the edge," King said. Phone calls would be made when Johnny got too out of control, and somebody always had to come out and take him away. Cindy Cash remembered those rescue missions. Mom putting us all in the car and us having to go look for Dad somewhere and pick him up, she recalled. She couldn't remember all the places they had to go to collect their father, but she remembered the feeling of never knowing where he might end up. Johnny's behavior at home wasn't much better. He had developed a habit of playing Christmas music loudly at all hours, which made him unpopular with the neighbors. Helen Boyd's husband, Jeffrey, who was a sheriff's deputy at the time, remembered having to go to the Cash house to tell Johnny to turn down the music. "I'm the one who told him to shut it down," Boyd said with a chuckle, adding that Johnny was actually nice and polite about it. It was a boisterous sound. It thundered all through there, down the creek bed. But Johnny's most famous incident in Ventura County happened in late June 1965, when he accidentally started a 508-acre forest fire near where Alder Creek spills into Sespe Creek above Fillmore. The fire, called the Adobe Fire, took a week to put out and required air tanker drops. Carl Rivenberg, who was an assistant fire control officer at the time, wrote Cash a citation and interviewed him at the scene. When he arrived in the backcountry, he found Johnny's pickup truck, which he affectionately called Jesse, pulled off to the side of the road with Cash sitting nearby. Johnny told Rivenberg that he had gone there to fish and that the fire started from his truck. After crawling underneath the vehicle, Rivenberg discovered that the exhaust pipe had separated from the muffler, causing heat to ignite nearby grass when Cash tried to start the camper. What worried Rivenberg more than the fire was Johnny's condition. He was just about 3/4 shot and couldn't walk real straight, Rivenberg said. "In my conversation with him, I considered him inebriated, probably drunk by liquor. Later, I wasn't educated on dope in those days. I thought he was probably shooting up on something." The fire cost Cash around $82,000 after his insurance companies were ordered to pay the bill. But the money wasn't the real cost. It was another sign that Johnny was spiraling out of control, and Vivian was powerless to stop it. When June Carter came into their lives. In 1958, Vivian met the woman who would eventually end her marriage, though she didn't know it at the time. June Carter was already a star in her own right, part of the famous Carter family that had been making country music for generations. But when Vivian first laid eyes on her, something inside her said, "Worry. This woman was a danger to my family," Vivian wrote about that first meeting. She couldn't explain why she felt that way. It was just intuition, the kind that women sometimes get when they sense trouble coming. At first, Vivian tried to ignore her feelings. After all, Johnny had told her, "I walked the line for you," which had become a song and a promise. She was the one Johnny walked the line for, the one he came home to, the mother of his children. But slowly, things began to change. Johnny started spending less time at home, and when he was there, he seemed distracted. Family members and bandmates began dropping hints, the kind of careful comments that let Vivian know something was happening without anyone having to say it directly. Then Vivian found the receipts, thousands of dollars worth of gifts for June Carter. That's when she knew that her worst fears were coming true. The movie Walk the Line later portrays Johnny as the aggressive pursuer and June as the reluctant one. But Vivian saw it differently. The most painful moment came during a backstage confrontation that Vivian wrote about in her book. She didn't say where it happened, but remembered June's words clearly. "Vivian, he will be mine." Anne Sharpstein, who helped Vivian write her book, said she wanted people to know June went after Johnny. That was where most of her pain and anger rested all these years. Vivian's daughter, Cindy, largely agreed with her mother's version of events. Once June came along, she relentlessly, she wanted Dad and she was going to get him, Cindy said. And she did. She made herself very available to where he pursued her back. But it wasn't just the affair that hurt Vivian. It was hearing June claim in interviews that she was raising Johnny's daughters. Vivian had stayed home, sacrificed her own dreams, and devoted herself completely to being a mother, only to have another woman take credit for her work. Vivian also believed that June was contributing to Johnny's drug problem, not helping solve it. She claimed that June Carter was not only a drug supplier for Johnny, but was also an addict herself. However, June later played a crucial role in helping Johnny overcome his addiction. With all three having passed away, the full truth about what really happened between them may never be known. What wasn't hidden, though, was Vivian's sadness. For years, she watched Johnny and June become country music's most famous couple, with their love story praised as one of the greatest in show business. Meanwhile, Vivian felt left behind, like a forgotten part of Johnny's past. People only talked about her because she had once been married to him. Some in Nashville even acted like she had never been part of Johnny's life at all, as if their marriage, love, and even their 4 daughters didn't matter. The marriage falls apart. By 1966, Vivian Cash couldn't take it anymore. The drinking, the pills, the other woman, and the constant stress of not knowing where Johnny was or what kind of trouble he might be in, it had all become too much. The woman who had once written that she simply agreed with whatever Johnny wanted to do and didn't have much of a mind of my own, was finally finding her voice, and what she had to say was that she couldn't live this way anymore. Vivian filed for divorce from Johnny in the summer of 1966. It wasn't a decision she made lightly. She had 4 daughters to think about, and divorcing one of the most famous men in America would bring its own set of challenges. But staying married to Johnny had become impossible. The man she had fallen in love with at that roller skating rink in San Antonio was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. The drugs had changed him, the fame had changed him, and June Carter had changed him. The divorce was granted in late 1967. Vivian was now a single mother of 4 girls, trying to rebuild her life while her ex-husband's career soared to even greater heights. But instead of falling apart, Vivian surprised everyone, including herself. Rather than being the shattered ex-wife that people expected, she threw herself into life and the community around her. She became a 3-term president of the Garden Club of San Buenaventura and did volunteer work for the county hospital and a home for unwed mothers in Los Angeles. Those who knew Vivian during these years spoke of her in glowing terms. She was kind, generous, down-to-earth, and socially engaging. She had become a decorating guru and an ace hostess, always ready with her trademark Afghans and homemade treats. But even as she built this new life, Johnny was never far from her thoughts. In 1968, Vivian remarried. Her new husband was Dick Diston, a Ventura police officer who still lived in town years later. All 4 of her daughters with Cash, Roseanne, Kathy, Cindy, and Tara, graduated from St. Bonaventure High School in Ventura. Cindy Cash said her mom was completely devoted to being a mother. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the pain Johnny had caused her, Vivian never badmouthed him or June to their daughters. But holding back all that hurt for so many years took its toll. Vivian's sister Sylvia Fly didn't even know about the divorce until she heard about it in the media. It came as a shock to her because she had looked at the Vivian-Johnny relationship with envy, thinking it was a wonderful marriage and great love, until pills and June interfered, and I don't know which one came first. The silence finally breaks. For decades after her divorce, Vivian Cash lived quietly in Ventura, raising her daughters and building a life away from the spotlight that had once consumed her marriage. She was, by all accounts, a private person who usually only talked about Johnny when others brought him up first. However, as the years passed, things happened that made Vivian's silence harder to maintain. The 2005 movie, Walk the Line, portrayed her unfavorably, almost as a shrew who stood in the way of Johnny and June's great love story. Vivian was aware of how she was being depicted in the movie. Friends said this portrayal hurt her deeply. She had been the one who stayed home, raised the children, and sacrificed her own dreams to support Johnny's career. Now, she was being painted as the obstacle to happiness, rather than the woman who had loved Johnny first and longest. Cindy Cash saw how this affected her mother. On the subject of being written out of Johnny's history, Vivian was frustrated and feeling invisible. She wanted, Cindy said, to finally have a voice. That's when Vivian decided to write her book, I Walked the Line, My Life with Johnny. Working with co-author Ann Sharpstein, she began going through almost 10,000 pages of love letters that she and Johnny had written to each other while he was stationed in Germany. The book's title was suggested by Vivian's friends. Most of the book consisted of Johnny's own love letters to Vivian, proof that they had shared something real and beautiful long before June Carter appeared. Vivian's sister, Sylvia Fly, explained why so many letters were included. The movie, as well as articles, had portrayed Johnny and June as this love story of the century. She wanted to show she and Johnny, had a great love too. She wanted to show people she wasn't the ogre, But it was the book's concluding section, where she spoke candidly about what had happened between her, Johnny, and June, that caught many of her friends off guard. Although Vivian had shared bits of her story over the years, she was usually a private person who kept most of her pain to herself. Helen Boydaventura said that while Vivian had opened up to her about some things, it wasn't hatred or venom or anything like that. And she didn't speak hostilely about June Carter. After decades of keeping her story to herself, Vivian was finally ready to tell the world what had really happened. The truth she finally told. Before she died in May 2005 at age 71, shortly after finishing her manuscript, Vivian Cash finally broke her silence about what had really happened to her marriage. And what she revealed wasn't what anyone expected to hear. Johnny Cash had blessed the book project and was supposedly going to write the foreword before he passed away in September 2003, but his fingerprints were all over it anyway. 75% of the 320-page book consisted of love letters he had written to Vivian during their separation. These letters proved that Johnny was not the man who had simply fallen out of love with his first wife and into love with June Carter. The letters showed a deep, genuine love between Johnny and Vivian that had lasted for years and produced 4 children. But Vivian's revelation went deeper than proving their love was real. In her book, she addressed the rumors and stories that had swirled around her marriage for decades. She talked about the pills that had changed Johnny, about June's role in pursuing him, and about the pain of being written out of his history. She wrote about losing her husband to another woman as a degrading, horrible experience, but she also wrote about forgiveness. In the end, she forgave June Carter for her role in destroying the marriage. What Vivian regretted most wasn't the affair or even the divorce. What she regretted was not fighting harder to save their marriage. "I should have been relentless at saving it, as relentless as June was at destroying it," she wrote. But most of all, Vivian regretted the anger she had carried around for all those years. Johnny had left without ever saying goodbye, without ever apologizing to her for the pain he had caused. "I'd have given anything to hear Johnny say he was sorry," she wrote. At the book's end, Vivian wrote that she hoped her daughters knew more than ever how much I loved their daddy. She also shared repeated dreams in which Johnny was standing by a dark car, motioning her to come over and telling her he wanted to talk. But the dreams always ended before Vivian could hear what he wanted to say. Maybe it was that apology she had always wanted to hear. When Vivian died on May 24, 2005, of complications from lung cancer surgery, perhaps she finally got to hear those words. "I hope someday we get to finally speak," Vivian had written. And maybe they finally did. What do you think? Was Vivian right to finally tell her side of the story? Do you believe Johnny really wanted to apologize to her after all those years? Share your thoughts in the comments.